Great, well welcome to this afternoon's call everyone. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Tony Restell and I'm the founder of both topconsultant.com, the management consultancy and contractor website, and also socialhire.com, the site for using social media to hire candidates and to secure a new role using social media. And what I'm going to be addressing you on over the course of the next couple of hours is specifically social networking, how you can use it to transform your job search, be that for contractor roles or for permanent roles, and also how you can use social networking more broadly to further your career and to improve your business networking and business development. So a lot of material we're going to take away from today. Those of you who were on the call just before we got started did a quick sound check with me and used the question facility. You should all see that over on the right hand side of your screens. If you'd like to put any questions to me during the course of the call, if anything's unclear, please do feel free to do that, and I will either tackle those questions there and then, or I will leave them till the end when we'll also have some time for answering questions as well. Just decided to go out of presentation mode. Okay, and we're back again. So, what are the objectives for today's briefing? Well, what I want to talk through with you, and I've really divided things into a couple of sections here. The first part of the presentation, we're going to talk very distinctly around how the hiring market has been transformed, and I use the word transformed because the way that recruiters are going about making their hires today is fundamentally different from how they made them a decade or so ago. And to many candidates, I find that the change that's taken place just hasn't been fully taken on board. And so I want to run through and make sure that you all have a really good understanding of that. How are companies hiring staff and contractors today? And then we're going to look at the marketing or the job hunting activities that you ought to be focusing your efforts on to have the greatest success in today's market. We're going to look at both passive and proactive strategies for uncovering opportunities and for getting yourself noticed. And I'm going to finish up also talking about the harsh reality about social media and its use as a job hunting and marketing initiative. We're going to look at some specific action steps that you can take right away, so things that you can go away at the end of this call over the course of the next days, you can implement, you can change, you can put right. And then in the second part of the call, for those of you who'd like to stay on for that as well, I'm going to move away from the hiring market and talk more generally around how you can use social networking to further your career. Because there's a huge difference at the moment between professionals who are building up an ever stronger network of contacts through regular interactions via social media and social networking, and those who have yet to embrace social networking, who to a degree are being left behind. So that's going to be the focus of our presentation today. Just a little bit by way of background about myself, and then we'll get things underway. I'm a graduate at Cambridge University myself, Judge Business School. I spent the first years of my career as a strategy consultant with Rodenberger Strategy Consultants, and then I've been in the online recruitment space since 2000. That's when I left consulting to set up the job board topconsultant.com. Many of you on the call will know that's focused on the management consultancy sector. That was acquired by JobSite a few years ago, and I became an executive at JobSite. And more recently have set up socialhire.com really to help both candidates and recruiters figure out how they can be making better use of social media in their job search or in their hiring activities. So let's delve right in and let's look at how the hiring market has been transformed over the course of the last years. And there's two things that I really want to draw your attention to. The first, and I've seen this up close and personal over the course of the last 13, 14 years, is the degree of fit that recruiters look for at different stages in the hiring market and in the economy. And there's a massive swing between the kind of 70% fit that they're looking for, between the requirements that they have for a role. That's what they might be willing to accept during a boom economy, versus the barely being willing to budge at all from their requirements during the kind of market conditions that we're in at the moment. And that has a huge impact on, independent of social media and social networking, that has a huge impact on you when you're looking for contract work, when you're looking for a new permanent position, because during those boom years, companies are so desperate to get their hands on enough staff to realize their growth ambitions, that they become increasingly willing to make lots of compromises from their perfect candidate profile. So they start out on a new hiring campaign with a certain set of things they're looking for, and as they start to see the short list of candidates coming through and they realize they're just not going to get someone who ticks all of those boxes, in a boom economy they're increasingly willing to compromise on those things, and so long as candidates can tick several of the key boxes, they're willing to compromise and accept that they're not going to get someone who ticks all the others. Whereas if I compare that with what we see in the hiring market today and in the types of requirements that job boards are getting through, for example, today there is really an insistence on a 95% candidate fit. If there's a list of 10, 15 requirements, bullet points that recruiters want in their adverts, they might accept a candidate that is falling short on one or possibly two of those, but they're certainly not going to show the kind of leniency that they would do during the more buoyant years. So for you as candidates, whether that be a contractor or whether that be a permanent candidate, in the kind of climate that we have today, which is improving, but it is still an employer's market rather than a candidate market. It's the roles that are in short supply, not the candidates right now. You do need to be going after roles where there is that really strong fit between yourself and between the positions being advertised. And a lot of the, speaking to candidates, a lot of the dissatisfaction that I find and a lot of the frustration I find with people trying to find new roles at the moment, in large part boils down to a shotgun approach where people are taking the view that the more roles they apply to, the better chance they stand of success. And actually what you really need to be doing in today's market is researching and finding those handful of roles where you really are one of the candidates who can tick all the boxes, and then putting your maximum effort into creating a tailored application for that particular contract opening or for that particular permanent role. And so that's one big change that I would definitely recommend you all think about implementing over the course of the coming weeks if you're actively in the market yourselves right now. So that's a big difference, unrelated to social networking and social media, but it's a big difference in terms of how you need to behave in this kind of market versus how you might have behaved in the boom years 2006, 7, 8. And the second huge thing that we need to take into consideration is obviously the economics of hiring channels, the evolution of channel costs and the evolution of barriers to entry in terms of the types of hiring channels that are available to employers now, and the way that the cost of using those channels has dramatically changed over the last few years. So these are the types of issues we're going to be looking at. Now, something that I'd like to give you a really strong understanding of is just how much the hiring market has moved on in terms of the options that are available to employers to take on and find hires. So this is the situation as it was in the 1990s, and what I'm addressing here, hopefully you can see my red marker on the screen. I've drawn up a matrix here just showing which particular channels gave employers the best candidate access, through from very modest, only covering a small portion of the market, to significant, right on through to comprehensively covering the market. And then what the incremental cost per hire was of using those channels. So at the point at which we make a hire through one of these channels, what has been the cost of making that additional hire? And I've positioned for you the various different options that employers used back then, and attempted to size these bubbles to give you an indication of how much hiring and how much contractor vacancy filling was done through these channels. And it was very much the case in the 1990s that recruitment agencies were far and away the most important source of candidate hires. They came with a relatively high cost per hire for each additional hire that was made, but they gave employers quite a significant access into the market through those recruitment agencies, advertising vacancies in newspapers, advertising them in their own newsletters and so on, and also delving in and approaching people who were already on their database. They didn't give employers full access to the market, and for that you really had to go down the route of a headhunter. So I draw the distinction here between recruitment agencies who are encouraging candidates to apply for roles and contacting people who are already on their database, versus headhunters who are really researching the market, identifying who are the 10 or 20 best candidates to fill a particular position, and then going out and doing everything necessary to speak to those 10 or 20 candidates directly. So two quite distinct approaches from two different types of recruitment firms there. And then the newspaper advertising business back in the 1990s was a very significant source of hires as well. Those of you from the UK, if you remember back to what the Sunday Times appointments section used to look like back in the 1990s, it was a huge thing that came with the Sunday papers, absolutely rammed full of thousands of job openings, and that would be one of companies' main routes for attracting direct applications. Careers fairs gave employers modest access to candidates, a useful channel, but absolutely no way that companies could rely on that alone, and referrals from their existing staff. Because we didn't have the types of sites that are in existence today, it was very hard to get the message out to networks of people that your particular company was hiring. So that was something that was used effectively by small companies as they were starting up. Perhaps the first few hires or the first few contractors would be brought in through referrals, but then that was more or less the limit of what they could deliver. Let me fast forward to the situation 10 years later. If I can just get the screen to move on. Bear with me just one moment. There we go. What happened that was, such a massive change in the industry in the 10 years there between the 1990s and the 2000s was really the arrival of job boards was the single biggest impact. All of a sudden you had a medium there that was attracting huge volumes of candidates who were all actively seeking new roles and who could be reached by employers directly. They didn't have to go through recruitment agencies for a pretty modest cost per hire. And so this, during that period in the 2000s, became employers' single most important source of candidate hires. Recruitment agencies correspondingly shrank a little bit as their overall share of the market was eaten into by the fact that employers could go directly to attract some of these candidates via job boards. Newspaper advertising, though, was the real loser, The reach of newspapers became less and less as more news moved online, and companies' willingness to advertise in print newspapers when there was this cheap alternative of job boards was just massively scaled back. So newspaper advertising really diminished. Recruitment agencies remained quite important, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that they have dwindled or died or anything like that. But there was a degree to which the amount of business that they handled was reduced by the arrival of job boards. Headhunters, were always a small component of the market, and remained as the route to approach a target list of the 10, 20 best people for a role in the industry. There's still that route, researching candidates, approaching them directly. Careers fairs stayed pretty much as is. The cost of attending them and of participating came down a little bit, so the cost per hire of going that route became a bit more attractive. Companies' own websites obviously emerged as an option for companies. The big problem that they bumped up against, though, was simply getting enough people, firstly, to go to those sites in the first place, and secondly, to go through the quite daunting and irritating online application processes that existed there. The referral mechanism did start to reach a greater proportion of the market simply through the more mass adoption of email and of various website capabilities that made it easier for companies to launch referral schemes, reward employees for bringing in people from their network. So that became a more important source of candidate hires. Now, if we then move on another 10 years to the kind of situation that we're seeing now, another massive change has taken place. And what we've seen over the course of really the last only 3 or so years is the massive impact of social media and social networking as a means for employers to start making hires directly. So the job boards came along and they allowed companies to make a portion of hires that they would previously have made through recruitment agencies to make them directly instead. And now social media and social networking has come along and is doing the same thing and extending that trend even further. And it's really interesting what's happening here. A lot of the talk in the media is around how social media and social networking sites are going to destroy the job board industry. And I remember back to when I was setting up Top Consultant, all the talk was about how job boards were going to destroy the recruitment agency industry. And actually that hasn't occurred over the course of the last 10, 15 years, because recruitment agents do something very different and distinct to what job boards do. Job boards do not allow employers to go after candidates in the same way that recruitment agencies do. And so job boards aren't a direct substitute for recruitment agencies. And the same is true of social media. A lot of the focus at the moment is talking around how all these social media sites now have some kind of job board component to them. And how, therefore, that must be the end of the job board industry. But what's very interesting when you talk to the employers using these sites is they're finding the job board parts of social media and social networking sites to be very ineffective. So they're not making large numbers of hires through those sites. They're encountering all the kinds of problems that they've always had with job boards. They get lots of applicants, that lots of those applicants are inappropriate, but they're not getting anything like the volumes of applicants and nothing like the volume of shortlist candidates that they would get through a specialist job board. Where the real success has come for employers has been in being able to proactively approach candidates on social networking sites, in particular LinkedIn, but it's also true that this is happening on sites like Twitter, to a degree on Google Plus as well. And so that's a massive impact here. That just because of the sheer numbers that are now registered on sites like LinkedIn, that's giving employers a means of reaching out and engaging with and approaching a significant portion of all the candidate market. And that has, together with the effect that job boards had already had, definitely had an impact here on recruitment agencies. The portion of work that is now flowing through recruitment firms is less than it would have been. And actually, the proportion of all hiring that's flowing through job boards is less than it would have traditionally been, because a portion of all roles that companies would have advertised in the past, they're now proactively going after the candidates they want via social networking, and in lots of cases never actually advertising those at all. The importance of referrals has also increased. There are various sites and various apps and plugins now that allow companies to leverage the networks of their employees and to multiply out and amplify recruitment campaigns that they're running by appealing to the networks of all of their existing employees. And so that has turned referral routes into a more significant source of candidate applications and a more significant source of hires than it would historically have been. The company website still continues to struggle, I think in large part because firstly it's a very time-consuming process to research an industry and then go around and look at the careers pages of maybe 100 different employer or end client sites versus using a job board or an aggregator that has pretty much all of those in one place. Secondly, companies are guilty of not always keeping their job boards up to date on their own sites because they're not paying for the privilege. You can find that there are roles advertised there that maybe have expired, have already been filled, or that maybe they are placing there to give themselves a pipeline of candidates should they need them in the future without there actually being specific roles to be filled. Careers fairs have really diminished in terms of the impact that they're having, mostly because these other routes now have become such powerful means for companies to approach candidates directly that there are fewer careers fairs taking place, and so companies are in less of a position to go and participate in those than they would have been in the past. Newspapers have completely scaled back in terms of the reach that they have, and now the cost per hire that they represent is extremely high. The interesting thing about social media and social networking, companies have had to invest very significant amounts up front in having a new team of people within their companies who research candidates on these sites and who go out and approach them directly to see if they're interested in a role, and also to pay for the license fees for accessing things like LinkedIn. So although the incremental cost per hire, how much it costs them to make each additional new hire via that channel, is relatively low, the overall cost of recruiting that way is actually a fair bit higher. And there are companies now that I'm hearing about who, having added up all the costs that they've incurred over the last year or two in recruiting in this new way, are actually not saving huge sums of money compared with the way they used to do it via recruitment agencies. So I am expecting that as the market picks up, we will see companies make greater use of recruitment agencies rather than necessarily doubling the size of their own social networking direct hires teams. Recruitment agencies work for the most part on a contingency basis, so they're only paid when a company actually successfully makes a hire or finds a contractor to bring on board. And so that is quite an appealing hiring model for employers because they're only paying when there's actually success. Whereas if you compare that with the options of using social media, you're paying up front for the cost of your recruiting team, you're paying up front for the cost of the license fees to use these products without the cost being tied to there being actual success in making hires. So that, firms are reluctant to tie themselves entirely to that means. So hopefully I've given you some good insights there. Hopefully you get a real feel for just how much the hiring market has changed over the course of the last 15-20 years. And if I just rewind back through these slides, if I can get the scheme to play ball here. Okay, I'm just going to go through these once more so that you can just see the kind of changes that there have been. So we can see the recruitment agency there shrinking, and correspondingly the newspaper advertising business shrinking back way further. So it's newspapers that have been the real losers out of what's happened over the course of the last 15-20 years. We can see the emergence of job boards having been a big contributing factor there last decade, and now the arrival of social media and social networking as well, furthering that trend even more. So some really major changes underway there, and when you combine that in with the fact that companies are not prepared to compromise over the expertise and the skills that they want candidates to have, this has quite profound implications for how you need to market yourself personally when you're looking for your next career move, for your next contract, for your next permanent job. So let's just talk through some of these changes a little bit more. Some big things to be aware of. There's been a huge shift in the availability and the cost of candidate information. If we think about the trends we've just seen in those last charts, one of the big things that was always a reason for using recruitment agencies and headhunters was the fact that they had these massive databases of candidates in any particular sector, so that at a moment's notice, if an employer needed a certain type of candidate to be brought on board, those recruitment firms and those headhunters could overnight approach large numbers of the right people and very rapidly bring them into the hiring process. And all the while that recruitment firms had those huge databases and employers did not, then there was a big barrier to entry and a big impediment to employers doing directly what recruitment agencies were earning their fees for doing. One of the hugest implications and ramifications of LinkedIn in particular is that employers now have access to a vast database of their own. If you're paying your LinkedIn subscriptions and you can access the entire LinkedIn network, you can search by a whole load of criteria to pull up who are likely to be the shortlist candidates you would like to invite into interview for your positions. And then you can fire out a message to those candidates to invite them into interview, to invite them to submit an application. You can direct market and approach candidates and have access to a database in a way that previously was purely something that recruitment firms had at their disposal. So it's allowed a whole new type of recruiting to take place through massively reducing the cost of having access to this database of candidates. Another big change that social media has brought about is companies have now got the possibility of becoming major publishers in their own rights and having huge audiences and readerships of their own. So again, if you go back in time, if companies wanted to get messages out to candidates about what they were like as an employer to work for, the kind of news and things that were happening within the business, alerts about the types of roles they were looking to fill, historically they would always have had to have paid other publications that had large readerships to get that message out to the right sorts of people. Whereas now, if a company can build up a huge following of the right types of people on their Twitter accounts or on their Facebook pages or their LinkedIn company pages, they can now actually publish and engage directly with that candidate audience without necessarily needing to pay those publishers for the ability to do so. And so again, that's further fed into the demise of newspapers in particular. Social networking sites have certainly increased the speed and the reach of companies' referral schemes. So companies can now encourage employees to take part in referral schemes within the business and to forward on openings and to suggest potential candidates for open positions in a way that's never been possible before. And so that is a big change that's happening, and we're going to see in some of the later slides that referrals are actually companies' #1 preferred source of hires. So that has a very major impact on the industry. Another key thing is that the social web now has given you as candidates and contractors much greater transparency about the pros and cons of working for different employers and different clients, so you can uncover things about them that just a few years ago you perhaps would not have uncovered until you'd actually started working there. But similarly, that spins the other way too. Employers can now find out an awful lot about you and can make judgments about what you're going to be like as an employee from all the things they can find out online about you. And that doesn't just mean finding Facebook photos that present you in a bad light. It means when they get to actually see on a day-to-day basis how you interact with other people on LinkedIn, how the things that you share, how other people respond to them, your engagements, how well received you are, how professionally you're regarded by other people. All these sorts of things they can start to take a view on based on the kinds of interactions that are happening socially on the web now. And the last thing I'd say here is there's also a new ability within the last years for you to engage with employers and their staff before and during a job application or a contract negotiation process. So it used to be the case that you'd apply for an opening, you put yourself forward for a contract, and the first opportunity that you'd have to speak to someone at that company would be when you were invited in for interview. Whereas now, chances are very good that you will have already engaged with people at that company before even submitting an application. And during the interview process, you could well be engaging and interacting with people at that company further still. And when you're made an offer, you may still be engaging and interacting with people at that business to decide whether it's the right move for you or not. So there's a huge flow now of conversation, and it's a two-way thing that influences who's hired and that influences where people decide to go and spend the next months or years of their life working. So I talked about this a little earlier, but just to really make the point as clear as I possibly can, many roles that you would previously have seen advertised. So let's say the last time you changed jobs was 5 or 6 years ago maybe. At that time, most of the openings that you would have wanted to be considered for would have been advertised, either advertised directly by the employers themselves, or they would have been advertised by the recruitment firms that they had working on their behalf. So it would have been possible for you to cover the market fairly comprehensively just by going out and researching and keeping an eye on all the vacancies that were being openly advertised. That is now no longer the case. So if we look at the cost of using different hiring channels, we saw that 10 years ago the company website was really the only source of free hires for companies, and that they couldn't rely on that very much because it just didn't produce enough volume of quality candidates for them. Whereas today they now have the ability, having paid up front for their teams of internal recruiters and paid up front for their LinkedIn licenses, they can now, as soon as there's a new requirement in the business, go out, research the kind of candidates they want to employ or take on as contractors, and approach those people directly via LinkedIn or via Twitter, for example, without ever having advertised the positions openly. And I saw some data in the last days that was showing, this is for the US market, that the hidden jobs market, so the number of roles that are filled without jobs ever having actually been advertised, has massively increased over the last few years. So that ties in exactly with the kinds of trends I'm talking to you about here. You need to have profiles on these sites that are going to appear when recruiters start searching for candidates or for contractors with the types of skill set that you have. If you're not doing that, there's now an increasingly large proportion of jobs and contracts that you're never going to know about because they're never going to be advertised, and they're going to be filled by direct approaches without you ever having heard about them. So those are, routes that companies can use that are free for them in terms of the incremental cost of bringing on board one extra person. Low-cost routes, still very much the job boards, so that is companies' next port of call, is to put roles that they're having a bit of difficulty filling, or where they need a larger response because of the number of people they need to bring on board. Job boards are still getting a good chunk of business there, and I think as the market recovers, we'll get increasing volumes of business. And referral schemes as well offer companies a low-cost route of tapping into candidate audiences and hires. One of the interesting things that we're hearing about LinkedIn in particular, but more generally social networking, and this is particularly coming out of the US, is that lots of the candidates who are in the greatest demand are actually now being approached so much on these sites that it's starting to become quite spammy and quite an irritation to them. So you've got candidates now who are, because they're very happy where they are, where they're currently working, are scaling back on their profiles so that they're less likely to be found by recruiters, and so that they receive fewer approaches from them. So there's a good chance that over the course of the next few years, as the hiring market picks up speed, the degree to which companies can rely on this option of approaching candidates directly is going to diminish. And so I think you will start to see more positions being advertised via job boards, and you will start to see more and more positions being pushed through companies' referral networks. And obviously the importance of that for you is you need to be connected to as many people as possible that you've had previous professional dealings with, because if you want to be someone who is being put forward or who's being alerted to opportunities within companies, you need to be networked with those people on social networking sites in the first place. And then the high-cost routes, well, obviously 10 years ago, recruitment agencies and headhunters and newspapers were the high-cost options available to firms. Today, that's pretty much now recruitment agencies. I mean, newspapers are still there as an option, but so few of the companies I speak with now are, putting any significant spend into that channel. It certainly wouldn't be one that I would be encouraging you to prioritise over the next years. Now, I touched on this briefly earlier, but one of the big changes that's happened is now a lot of research has been done by employers and by industry bodies on the importance of different sources of candidate and contractor applications. And study after study is showing the kind of results that we're seeing here, that referral hires are employers' preferred source of new employees. What they're tending to find is that they can make hires through a referral route faster than through any other channel. They tend to bring in candidates who already have a better understanding of the business, so who are more likely to accept an offer if it's made, because clearly if you're being referred into a position, you already know someone who works there and perhaps have had some dealings or had some discussions around that company. And thirdly, companies are seeing that people who are coming through that referral route are tending to stay with the company for longer and to be more successful with the company. So that is proving to be companies' top source of hires in terms of where they would prefer to get their new hires from. So if you're someone who's been standing off of networking as extensively as you could do on social networking sites, one of the direct implications of that is you're now likely to have access to far fewer job opportunities and contracts via your referral networks than someone who has been much more actively engaged in this over the course of the last years. Similarly, you can see obviously internal transfers. No surprise that that's a good source of successful hires. Direct sourcing though, so that's going after candidates directly and using social networks to go after candidates directly are two very favourable sources as well. And then you can see corporate websites, recruitment agencies, third-party recruiters, campus recruiting and job boards. There is less likelihood of hires being made that way actually working out well for the company. So that's why it's so important for you in this day and age to be as well networked as you possibly can, because otherwise you're going to be missing out on the referral route, you're going to be missing out on the direct sourcing and the social networking route. And if what we're seeing in the business, as I showed you in that matrix earlier, is that companies are trying to make their hires through these referral routes and direct sourcing social networking routes first, and then only turning to the other routes if they can't make them that way. If you're not actively engaged in networking, then basically there's a whole portion of opportunities now that you're simply not exposed to and never being considered for. So, having said all that, what are the marketing and job hunting activities that you must now focus your efforts on? Well, you want to be selectively proactive, so selectively going after roles that you see out there that look a good fit for you, but also making sure that you're going to be found by recruiters looking for people with your skills. Both of these things are now key. Applying to job adverts, predominantly on job boards, possibly also in specialist publications or occasionally newspapers, is still highly worthwhile, but it's only worth doing if you're being laser focused and targeting your applications only at those roles where you really do have that strong 95% fit with the requirements that are being sought. If you don't have that, you're simply going to be filtered out at the CV screening stage. You're never going to be invited in for interview if you don't have that strong fit with the openings. These kinds of job adverts, though, they do remain one of employers' lowest cost sources of hires. So you will see, and you will have seen over the last months, lots of coverage around is social media spelling the end of job boards and of other places where jobs are advertised. I would caution you to take that kind of headline very much with a pinch of salt. These publications, they need to sell and they need to get readers coming to their sites and buying their publications. And so that kind of sensationalist story often sells a lot better than the reality, which is more what I've been describing to you. You'll have guessed already that having your application referred into businesses can massively increase your chances of being noticed. There are various channels out there now for establishing who you know, who already works at a company. So when you see a role being advertised, looking to see if there are ways that you can get your CV in for consideration, but being recommended in by someone who already works there rather than just applying cold. So as part of that trend, what you need to be doing is going back through your email inboxes, going back through all the conferences you've attended, the delegate lists you've had, and so on and so forth, figuring out all the professional people you've had interactions with over the course of your career, and reconnecting with those people as much as you can, interacting with them via social networks so that you've got that bond there that they will refer positions onto you, and so that when you need help, they're more likely to be inclined to try and help you. It's fine to discreetly let these people know when you are in the market for a new job or a new contract again. The one thing that I would caution here is to avoid desperation. A lot of job seekers I see using social networking sites fall at the first hurdle because the first interaction they have with people on social networking is a desperate plea for help in their job search. Our company's just been bought and I'm desperate to get out of here. I know you haven't heard from me for 10 years, but if you know anyone, and that kind of approach doesn't work as well as if the contact is already warmed up and has had some interactions with you more recently. I'd also caution you that a portion of all roles, and an important portion of all roles, are still filled by recruitment agencies and headhunters. So absolutely do not discount this avenue. And there are some very profound reasons why employers will continue to use recruitment agencies in the future. For example, if a company knows that a certain team has just been poached by a competitor and is going to be leaving within the next month or the next 3 months, they have to make hires to replace those people, and they have to do it discreetly. So they can't be seen to be openly advertising for those positions. They will be reluctant to directly approach candidates when it's apparent that it's that company that is in trouble and needs to make hires. They will use the discreet route of a recruitment agency to achieve that type of thing. Similarly, when companies find themselves short of recruiting manpower, they just don't have enough people to do the volume of recruiting that needs to be done. Well, at that point, it's very easy to turn to recruitment agencies who are working on a contingency, a success fee only basis, and having them be a significant source of additional manpower and additional candidate applications. I could spend half an hour talking just about that subject, but in both the contractor market and the permanent hire market, do not discount the role that recruitment agencies continue to play in those markets, and there will be a portion of roles that will only be being filled via that kind of route. So you do want to be engaging with a small number of specialist recruiters in your particular area. And I would say invest the least amount of your time applying to jobs that are advertised on social media sites, because that's where companies are getting the lowest quality of response, and so are sifting through the volumes at the greatest speed, and are most likely to discount candidates having only glanced at their CV very briefly, and instead focus on making sure that your social media profiles are likely to be found by recruiters who are looking for candidates in your area. We're going to go on and look at that a little bit in a few moments, and the kinds of things that you need to be doing there. But make sure instead of spending time applying to those roles on social media sites, instead make sure that you're someone who is actually going to show up when a recruiter starts searching for their ideal candidate. I'd recommend, as a medium-term career strategy, over time build up your network of contacts, particularly in the target markets that you're interested in, so that over time your social footprint is growing. With the tools that are out there now, it's very easy to find and add people that you've met at business meetings, that you've encountered at conferences, and so on and so forth. That should be part of your your weekly routine for your career to grow your footprint. And be proactive in getting yourself onto the radar of recruiters as well as waiting to be found. So you want to have recruiters in your sector already be aware of you, so that when your photo and your profile appears in the types of searches that they're running, they're more inclined to click on you as a potential candidate than anyone else, because they already have that interaction with you and that rapport built. So let's look at a little bit of data on recruiters' use of social networking platforms to make hires and figure out which sites they're using and where it's most important for you to have a presence. And probably not going to be any great surprise to you here, but LinkedIn is now the default social network that recruiters turn to for recruiting. As we've talked about, it's not so much for the job advertising that they're doing on those sites, but for bringing candidates into their recruiting process who they've proactively gone out and sourced from that channel. So 99% of recruiters using LinkedIn in this particular survey by Social Talent, 2/3 using Twitter, just under half using Facebook. And then in various countries you'll have other networks like Zing and Viadio who have a particular foothold in certain geographies. So depending where you are tuned into this call, also consider local network sites like that. Similarly, when recruiters are asked for those same networks, which of them are they actually making successful hires from, well, again, it's LinkedIn that comes out massively on top, with Twitter and Facebook very distant second place. So LinkedIn is certainly somewhere you have to have a presence. I would also say that it is worth having a presence, particularly on Twitter as well, but we'll go on to look at that in just a few moments. Another different source here, JobVeet, has found over, in their most recent survey, 92% of recruiters now are using social media to recruit, and 89% have success on LinkedIn, compared with much smaller percentages on Facebook and on Twitter. So, again, the message here very, very clear, I hope. And from that same source, another very interesting statistic that comes out is that candidates who are referred into roles are 14 times more likely to secure that role than candidates who have simply applied for an opening that they've seen online. So a massive leap in your prospects of being hired or being brought in on a contract if you are referred into that that business by someone else. And for anyone who's been in sales, this comes as no surprise at all. It's much easier to make a sale where you've been referred into a business as a service provider that is worth engaging with, and the same rules apply with candidates and with jobs. The endorsement of someone who already works within the business, even if it's only a loose contact, is extremely powerful. And I touched on this briefly earlier, but keep in mind also recruiters are doing a lot of research and targeting of candidates via social networking sites, but they're also using these sites to research people that they may be considering bringing on board, in part to look for things that might put them off. So, they could be put off if they see, inappropriate photos, if they see business interactions between you and, customers, clients, colleagues, whatever it might be, that don't quite fit with their organization. These kinds of things can put employers off, but also quite often it can solidify a decision to hire you if they do see the kind of character traits, they do see the kind of behavior on these sites that reinforces the reasons that they chose to consider making you an offer. So don't see cleansing your Facebook profile and so on as being the only aspect of background checking on you that you want to be engaged in. You also want to be conscious that everything you're doing and sharing on social networking, and the more professional you're making yourself look through those interactions, the stronger that's going to play into making you someone that these companies want to hire or want to engage as a contractor. So let's just talk about specific actions that you can take to further your career and to further your job search. And a few things I'd like to talk about here. Firstly, I would recommend, well, three things I'd recommend you do following today's briefing. Firstly, I would suggest, based on what we looked at before about the types of recruiting channels and how companies are using them now, I would recommend that you revisit which channels you're going to use in the future and reprioritize where you're going to invest your time. As part of your job search or as part of your search for your next contract opening. Clearly, some channels have become a lot less effective than others, some channels have become a lot more effective, and a portion of all opportunities are now only available to those people that employers find by approaching them directly. So, some investment needed there. Secondly, you want to perfect your LinkedIn profile so that you're appearing in the types of searches that recruiters are going to be conducting if they're looking for candidates for the types of roles that you aspire to secure. The same is actually true if you're looking to win business. You want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is going to appear in the types of searches that your ideal target customers might be doing on LinkedIn. And then once you've made sure that your profile is going to appear in those searches, also make sure that your profile does a good job of selling you. So does it come across as a dry, bland profile, or does it really jump out of the screen at the potential client, at the potential employer, and really do a great job of selling you as someone they should want to be dealing with. And then thirdly, I would suggest it's worth taking some time to decide which of the social networks you are and are not going to invest some of your time in cultivating, and coming up with a plan that you think you can commit to each week that you're then going to do going forwards to build your social footprint for the future. Now, I wanted to just spend a short moment on LinkedIn in particular, because we've seen just how important this is to recruiters as a means of proactively approaching candidates as opposed to ever actually advertising the position at all. And LinkedIn's been changing, its layout, pretty much weekly over the last months. So this is a screenshot from very recently. You'll see on the right-hand side of your homepage, you should see what I've circled here, some statistics on how many people have viewed your profile in the last days, and also how many times you appeared in search results. So I'd suggest that you keep an eye on that particular statistic, and if you actually click on the link that's within that, you'll then get taken through to a page that actually shows you how many times you being viewed or appearing in searches by recruiters. Now, this particular part of the site has changed literally in the last 48 hours. So you may see graphs that look slightly different to this, but fundamentally the message is still the same. You can go here and start to see, are the changes that you're making on your LinkedIn profile resulting in you appearing in more searches, and are they resulting in you being viewed more often? And similarly, if you're starting to engage in groups or any other activity on LinkedIn, you can keep an eye here on seeing what impact that's having on the number of people that are actually choosing to come through and find out more about you. Now, in terms of being found for your next job or being tracked down as a contractor for a new contract opportunity, what you really need to do here is put yourself in the shoes of the person who's trying to fill the position. And they will have had a requirement come through from the business to the recruitment or the HR team, and that requirement will have certain must-have criteria within it. And you're all familiar with job adverts, where you get to the part of the job advert, you know, they've done the bit about telling you about the company, they've done the bit about selling you on why you should want the job, and then you get to the bit that says, you know, we're looking for candidates who are able to display all of the following traits and expertise and experience. And then there's a bullet point list of these are the things that we want candidates to have. And that's true whether you're going for a permanent role or whether you're going for a contract opportunity. The employers, the companies are going to have criteria there that they don't want to diverge from. And we talked about in a boom market they might accept 70% match between what they're looking for and what you can offer, but in a tighter labour market, or tighter in terms of the number of jobs available, they're not going to accept that compromise. They're going to be looking for a 95% fit. And what I would suggest you do is search out job adverts or contract listings for the types of roles that you aspire to securing, and going down and copying and pasting, starting to make a list of the candidate requirements that are appearing within these jobs. And you should start to see some very common themes emerging, that all the employers looking to fill very similar positions are asking for a very similar skill set or experience profile. Now you have to put yourself in the shoe of being that recruiter who is using one of these social networking tools to search for candidates who have those skills. And what they're going to do is take that brief from the business, take those list of bullet points, and they're going to start searching profiles on LinkedIn, profiles on other social media sites to find candidates who offer all of those things. So you need to do an audit of your own profile, and in particular your LinkedIn profile, and see that as much as possible it is including the types of experience, skills, certifications, whatever it may be, that recruiters are consistently asking for in their adverts. And that is what is going to result in you starting to appear in a lot more search results that recruiters are conducting on LinkedIn and on other sites. That's what's going to result in your profile being viewed a lot more, and that's what's going to result in you receiving a lot more offers to come into the interviewing and the application process. So that's what it's absolutely key for you to do. Make sure that you've incorporated those somewhere within your profile. Add sections to your profile, add projects or whatever it may be if you need to get those keywords into your profile, and make sure that you've got all the variants covered as well. So don't assume that just because you've got business development on your profile that a search for sales or for selling or whatever else is necessarily going to bring you up. Try and use the different variants of those keywords within your profile, so that as much as possible you're making yourself someone who will appear when a recruiter does that kind of search. The other things you want to do are to make sure that your headline So the very first thing that recruiters see when you come up in a search result does a good job of selling you. If you're a contractor, maybe when you're becoming available, when you'll be able to start on a new assignment. If you're a candidate for permanent positions, what are your main USPs? What's your main sales point as a candidate, and have that in your headline. And then within the profile itself, make sure that it does a great job of engaging recruiters about what a great professional you are, rather than being a really dry list of responsibilities and so on. I provided a link there, and I will send you this presentation after the call, so you're able to go through there, and there's a bit of a description in that article of how you can go about doing that kind of reverse engineering, if you like, of your profile. Mentioned just then, revisit your LinkedIn headline. So do a search for yourself and for other people you know on LinkedIn. See the search results that come up, and notice how it's your headline that appears alongside your photo as one of the first things that recruiters see. And also, you'll notice if you start participating in LinkedIn groups and the like, when email alerts go out each day to people who are in that group, that headline also appears alongside your name in all of those LinkedIn group discussions within those email alerts. So your headline there has a great opportunity to present what you do, when you're available, what you're looking for next, depending on your circumstances. Mine talks about how I'm someone who helps employers to use social media to make their next hire, and helps candidates to use social networking to find their next job opening. So anyone who has any interaction with any of the groups that I'm a member of, or who brings me up in a search result, will see that as the first tagline that they see about me. Complete your profile as much as possible. There have been some very good articles showing that the more complete your profile is, the higher you're likely to appear in LinkedIn search results. And similarly, add connections. And I'm not talking here about going out and spamming people that you don't even know what they look like, but go back through all the interactions you've had over the years and figure out all the people where you did have some kind of meaningful interaction with them before, and reconnect with them. And you can use the LinkedIn tools to import your email address book and the like, to do that in a really time-effective manner. So there is no excuse for not doing that. But if having more connections on LinkedIn is going to mean that you appear more highly in search results, and it's also going to mean that you get referred more job and contract opportunities through your network, then those are two very good reasons for being someone who is more proactive in connecting, rather than sits back and keeps a very small community there. I would also recommend that you join relevant groups in your sector, in your location, so that recruiters have a free way of contacting you privately on the site. Something that lots of people don't realise: once you are a member of a group, the default setting is that any other member of that group can contact you for free on LinkedIn privately. So whereas you have to buy a LinkedIn InMail to send a message to someone who isn't in your direct network, if that same person shares a group with you, you can go to that group and you can send that person a message, the same InMail that you would have otherwise paid for. You can send them that message for free. So being a member of groups for the types of sectors and skills that you work in is a very good way of allowing recruiters who operate in that sector, and employers who operate in that sector, to contact you freely. And I talked also, as point 3, about deciding which social networks you're actually going to invest in, and formulating a realistic plan for having a good presence on those sites. I would say that realistically, while you're learning the ropes with sites, you need to count on spending 20 to 30 minutes a day to have a presence on any of these networks that is meaningful and worth having. As you become more familiar with the sites, as you become better at seeing what works and what doesn't work, you'd whittle that down to maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day for each network. So think about your commuting time, think about the amount of downtime you have where you could pull out a tablet and productively do something like this, and then decide, based on this time commitment, how many networks is it actually realistic that you could maintain a professional presence on. Because I would advocate that it's much better to have a really good presence and be really engaged and regularly present on a smaller number of networks than to spread yourself too thin and then not be around on networks when people are actually trying to engage with you. And part of that is obviously then going to be, once you've thought about your time commitment, which networks are you going to prioritize? Now, just as a sort of quick headline in terms of that, some of you on the call are contractors wanting to market yourself for your next contract position. Some of you are permanent hires. All of you are going to be interested in using these sites to grow your business networks over the next years. I would say that LinkedIn is the best site for, best network for being found. So because of the richness of the profile data that they have, it's the best site for recruiters or business partners to find you. It can also be good for web traffic. So if you have your own blog or you're part of a company where it's beneficial to you to increase the traffic to certain parts of the website, LinkedIn can be good for that. I would say it's the worst for quick response conversations. The single biggest downside that LinkedIn has compared with Google Plus and Facebook and Twitter is that lots of users are only on there sporadically, and so if you send a message to someone, you can't expect a same-day response. Whereas I would say if you're doing that on Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus, the chances are pretty good you will get a same-day response. With Twitter, you may even get an instant response. Conversely, Twitter is best for quickly building relationships. I've found, personally, I've grown from having no Twitter following to having well over 10,000 followers on the Twitter site, in a very short space of time. And I find that once you find someone who's interesting to be having dealings with, it's only a few messages back and forth before you start to have that ability to call on them, to interact with them as and when you need to. So it's the best for initiating quick response conversations. And if I was thinking of a candidate who's struggling to make headway in their search for a new job, setting up a profile so that you're found on LinkedIn is important. But if you actually want to be proactive and go after recruiters who may be able to help, who may operate in the sectors that you target, I would say Twitter is the network where you stand the greatest chance of building up that kind of rapport quickly. Like LinkedIn, Twitter can also provide very significant web traffic, so that's a consideration for some of you. Google Plus, by contrast, I would say has the greatest time investment to get to any given size of network. It is increasingly important for search engine rankings, though, so depending on whether you have a website of your own that it's important for you to promote, increasingly Google is thought to be weighting its search engine results on the strength of the authors, so how well connected they are on Google Plus, and the amount of sharing of that particular website that is happening on Google Plus. And obviously, if you have a strong presence on Google Plus yourself, your ability to get your website shared on that platform is much greater than if you have no presence there. So different reasons to consider being on those different networks. Facebook, I see primarily as a personal networking platform. There are job search plugins for the site, so I wouldn't totally discount it as a means of applying for roles and being considered as a referral hire, but as a means of directly engaging with recruiters, I would say, and being found as a potential hire, it's probably less important. Very quick fire recommendations on how to implement a consistent and engaging presence on these kind of platforms, and then we're going to spend the rest of the session actually going through how you can be more effective in social networking outside of the context specifically of being hired. I would say you want to have a consistent presence on whichever sites you choose to be on. I would suggest it's worth figuring out a content strategy for those different sites. So to start building up and to start having interactions with people, it's good to be someone who is seen as sharing information that is useful to people in that particular professional sector. So, if you are a telecom strategy expert, then being the person who's regularly sharing, the latest developments from the telecom sector, who's always giving people links to download, the latest analyst report on what's happening in the telecom sector. These kind of things are what start to make you be noticed as someone who is perceived to be an expert in that space. And you increasingly get a following of other professionals who are in that sector, and you increasingly get a following of recruiters who are in that sector as well. Google is shutting down its RSS reader in the next days, so I would suggest setting up an account with a website called Feedly, which allows you to pull in all your favorite sources of information. So you can have that as one place where you go each day and you see all the headlines for the particular publications that you're most interested in. And from that page, you can very quickly share content and set it up to share over the course of the coming days. If you've got what I call evergreen content, then that is great to have a list of as well. Evergreen content is content that doesn't go out of date quickly. So, an example would be how to do well in job interviews. That news about, company A having taken over company B is news today. If you share that same thing 2 months from now, people are going to wonder why on earth you're doing that. So that isn't evergreen. But advice on how to do well in job interviews is evergreen because it's going to be as useful to people 3 months from now as it is to them today. So if you have some evergreen content, maybe some white papers or opinion pieces that you've shared that aren't based on data that's going to quickly go out of date, that kind of stuff, having a file of that somewhere in Excel that you can just pull on whenever you need it is very useful. And incorporating your own content where you can. So it's great to share as much content from other resources as possible so that you're not always seen as someone who's only promoting your own stuff, but then incorporating in whatever content you do personally have that is useful for that audience as well. And then I would say look at tools to automate or schedule your presence. So Hootsuite and Buffer are two services you can look up online. There's a free version of both. They allow you to schedule in advance messages that you want to send out on things like LinkedIn and Twitter and so on, so that you can spend a few minutes at the beginning of each day or the beginning of each week finding content that your network is going to appreciate, setting up messages that you'll send out to them, and then that will continue to go out even when you're on client site with your latest client, or if you're out at job interviews or whatever it might be, you'll still be engaging with your network. And then when you're back at your computer, whatever interactions there have been as a result of that, you can then respond to. Do Share is a similar offering, but purely for sharing on Google+. Buffer and Hootsuite don't allow you to share on Google+. And IFTTT means if this then that, and it's a way of automating things. So you have a trigger and you have a desired outcome. So you could say, for example, whenever my name is mentioned in a Google alert, send me an email with the links to those particular news items. So you could do that for a company. If you know you're going for interview with a particular company or a particular department, and you want to be alerted by email whenever there's a new breaking news item about that company, you can set up IFTTT to do exactly that. Tons and tons of ways you can use that really usefully. So it's definitely a site I'd recommend having a look at. And also definitely figure out ways to have access to these sorts of things on your smartphone or your tablet, whatever you're going to have with you when you're commuting, when you're in time windows that would typically be downtime for you. So we've looked there so far at the massive changes that there have been in how employers are using social networking and social media to go out and make hires and find contractors. We've looked at the types of things that you can do to increase the chances of your profile being noticed by the right sorts of people, and briefly touched on the ways that you can improve your networking so that over time you're growing your footprint. And what I want to do in the rest of the call, we've got about half an hour remaining, is to just open your eyes a bit more to the importance of social networking as a tool to further your career. So we're going to talk briefly about that, and then I'm going to talk through some tips of things that people who are doing really well on social networking and really getting a strong following and a strong network that helps them, what are those people doing differently to everyone else? So I'm going to talk you through those. So we've covered off the part that's specifically focused on finding a job or landing your next contract. So I leave it to you whether you would like to participate in the rest of this session or not, but I will throw things open to questions at the end of the session. So just as a very brief exercise, I just would like you to think for a moment about a scenario. Let's take ourselves back to a situation before the internet existed, and let's think of two people in a community who both need to sell their house. So we've got on one side Sociable Steve. Sociable Steve knows everyone in the local town. He does all sorts of social activities. He's always out in the local shops, in the local community, doing things, talking to people, being seen, being asked for advice. He's always helping people. Everyone knows Sociable Steve. And then there's Timid Tim. And Tim is quite a recluse. He lives at home, and he'll go out and do his day's work. He'll have modest amounts of interaction with people, just the bare minimum that's needed to get his job done and to live his life, but no more than that. And both Steve and Tim have a house to sell, and they're essentially identical properties. They're both in similar locations, but there's this big difference between how they're known within their communities and how they're regarded. So if we just try and imagine that situation, take yourself back to before the internet existed, what kinds of things might happen to those two individuals? They've both put their house on the market, they've both got an estate agent involved, they've both got their newspaper adverts running to show that their property is for sale. But what kind of other things would happen on the side? Well, I'd put it to you that Sociable Steve would get a heck of a lot of word-of-mouth coverage that would be absolutely free to him. He'd go down to the shops, he'd start talking to people about the fact that he's looking to sell his house, and all sorts of people would start saying to him, I know someone who's who's just looking in the area, or my family's about to move down here and they're looking for a place like that. He'd go into the butchers, and the butchers would start spreading the word for him. The butchers might offer that he could put up a postcard in the window to say that he's selling his house and to put some details there. He might get some free newspaper coverage if he's on the parent-teacher association with, you know, someone from the local newspaper, you know, they might give him a bit of extra coverage about his house. Likewise, radio coverage, community notice boards, because everyone knows Steve. Anyone who's got a notice board, you know, is going to be happy to give him some extra exposure. Because loads of people, you know, come and see Steve, there's going to be loads of drive-by interest. Various people are going to become aware of the fact that he's selling his property simply by going about their day-to-day routine, which involves interacting with Steve. And the estate agent level, Steve's not going to need, you know, loads of estate agents involved, because there's so much interest in his property being drummed up just from the community around him. Whereas Timid Tim, he is pretty much reliant on paying for newspaper coverage and advertising and paying estate agents to reach out to their databases of potential buyers. So Timid Tim's very much reliant on a smaller set of channels for finding a buyer and having to pay a much higher premium for doing so. Now, some live events, you know, we'll have some fun here talking about all the things that might unfold over the next you know, days and weeks. But sort of cutting to the chase, what's likely to have happened 3 months after their respective houses were put on the market? Well, you know, usually the conclusion we come to is that Sociable Steve is highly likely to have sold his property. Timid Tim may very well still have his property up for sale. And with his social network there magnifying his own sales efforts, Steve's house is likely to have sold. He's probably had a flood of viewings. He may well have had multiple buyers who've ended up bidding on the house. He'll have a buyer, quite possibly paying over the asking price. And even if that offer falls through for some reason, if the mortgage doesn't come good or whatever it may be, he's got a whole load of other backup offers in his pocket. So Steve's very well placed to have sold his property, and he's likely to have paid below average costs to market and sell his property. He won't have had to have spent so much on newspaper advertising. He will only have needed to engage one recruitment agent, estate agent, so you know, he's going to have low agency fees as well. Compare and contrast that with Timid Tim. He's going to have had far, far fewer viewings. He's going to have had to have engaged additional estate agents to tap into their additional databases of potential buyers. He's probably going to have had to have paid for additional advertising, maybe radio advertising, maybe newspaper advertising. Buyers are going to be wary that the lack of viewings that there've been have somehow indicated that there was something wrong with the property. Just as a lack of interest in interviewing you as a candidate is going to make employers worry about whether you're a good hire or not. And Tim probably had to drop his asking price to try and stimulate additional interest in his property. So you can see there with two people who had exactly the same thing to sell, the difference between the one who's very socially engaged and has a strong network to call upon, and a group of people who have rapport with him, who he's helped over the years, who want to help him back, versus someone who has just the bare essential contact with people that's needed. You can see huge differences in the speed with which they can get things to happen, the cost with which they get things to happen, and ultimately the results that they enjoy. And I would put it to you that there's huge parallels here in multiple aspects of your career, in terms of searching for new business for your company, in terms of finding joint venture partners, in terms of winning new clients, or in terms of securing fast-track career moves or more lucrative contract assignments. All of these things you, I'm sure, can see you'd be in a better position to achieve if you had a large network of people all pulling in the same direction as you and all vying to help you versus being in a situation where you're pretty much going it alone. Now, again, in a live event, I would ask here for a quick show of hands to see how many people have 1,000 or more connections on LinkedIn, how many have 500 or more connections on LinkedIn, how many are actively engaging on Twitter every day, how many have invested in building an active network on Google+. And this is really the key one, who has actually got updates going out to their network while they're sat on a call like this, or while they're out visiting clients, or while they're otherwise engaged. Maybe take a moment to think through those questions yourself, but I would suggest most people I come into contact with, it's the people who are really enjoying success through social networking that are doing these kind of things, not necessarily all of them, and it's the people who are being somewhat left behind who can't tick any of these particular questions. So assess yourself there honestly, think about where you actually stand in relation to these things. We talked about already which networks you should be on, so in the interest of time I won't dwell on that any further. You have that information already, but depending on what your goals are from being on this call, you'll want to choose which of these networks is going to produce the best results for you, and also as a function of the amount of time you need to put into each of them. So once you've decided which networks you're going to be on, what are some simple steps you can take to become more effective? We're going to run through these, and then that'll be the end of the call, other than happily tackling any questions that you may have. So here are some networking tips, things that I'm seeing people who are really enjoying lots of engagement on their social networks, who when they ask for help have people jumping to their side to assist them, who are getting large volumes of interest in their business or their candidacy from their social activities via social networking sites. These are the types of things that those people are doing. So let me run through them with you. The first thing I would say those networkers are doing is setting aside time each week that they're devoting to actually cultivating new relationships. So always looking for opportunities to strike up new relationships, and ideally having a weekly target or a regular routine, a regular schedule that ensures whatever else happens in your working week, you have done something that has grown your network consistently week on week. And that can be as simple as making sure that the people that you've had good email interactions with, you go on to connect with on sites like LinkedIn. It could be being proactive when you've participated in, let's say a conference or a careers event or whatever it may be, to get your hands on the delegate list and to make sure you've followed up with as many of the people that you interacted with as possible. These sorts of things all take a little bit of effort, and so they don't happen naturally, but that can be the difference between someone who has hundreds and thousands of network connections versus someone who only has 100 or 200. And people who haven't yet fully engaged in social networking are often horrified at the prospect that someone could have 500 or 1,000 LinkedIn connections. How can you possibly know that many people that well? Well, I would put it to you that anyone who's been in business for 5-10 years or more has attended enough events, has been to enough business meetings, that it's very credible that they would have those kind of numbers of people that they have engaged with, that they have built up credibility with. And some of the most interesting studies into who is and is not finding work at the moment have shown that people who reach out to a network of looser contacts like that are far more likely to be successful in securing a new career position that involves advancement, involves salary progression, than those people who only reach out to their very closest contacts. So that would be the first tip. The second tip is absolutely to focus on engaging with people and helping other people, not with self-promotion. And you immediately see the people who are doing this wrong day in, day out. Recruitment firms out there who do nothing but bombard their LinkedIn streams with their latest job adverts, or people who do nothing other than go to this link to to enter your discount code for the following product. That is just doing what people have always done, namely advertising via the social networking channels. That is not engaging with other people. So always be on the lookout to find ways that you can help others and share content, share insights that are going to help them to advance professionally in their careers or hit their targets. And that is what will make people tune in to what you have to say, so that they start looking out for your next update, because they consistently see that what you share is worth paying attention to. It's a bit like being, in the old days, being a great newspaper. If you're a newspaper that's always putting out trashy news stories that turn out to be, rubbish and no substance to them, people are going to invest less time, or professionals are going to invest less time in reading that kind of stuff than in reading publications where the material is really well researched and is always on the money in terms of predicting what's going to happen next. So that's what you want to be, someone who people are always tuning in to see what you've got to say. It is okay to promote yourself or to promote your services, but just do it sparingly. So, if 1 in every 10 of your updates is, asking people for help or letting them know what services you're able to offer or whatever it may be, that's fine if the other 9 updates are all sharing things that help those other people rather than benefiting you. Getting that balance right is absolutely key. The third one, and we talked about this a little bit in terms of the job search side of things, make sure you connect with people and build those relationships in advance of needing help. One of the biggest downfalls I see of people is that they turn to social networking in desperation because they've suddenly found themselves in a situation where they need something. They're going to miss their target and they desperately need to find new sales leads within the next week. Or they're in the firing line, or they've suddenly found themselves in a position where they desperately need to find a new job because they can't stay where they are for whatever reason. Only turning to social networking when you have those needs is turning to it too late. Think of social networking like a bank account. You've got to have put money into the bank account before you've got money in there that you can draw out again. And social networking is similar. You've got to have put value into the community and the network before you can expect to extract value from that network. And certainly appearing desperate is one of the top mistakes that I see, even the most professional business people making. Try to share, and I use the word here, outstanding content, advice or assistance whenever you can. So you want to be in a position, we touched upon briefly before, where people in your network are really eager to see what is going to be the next thing they're going to learn from you. You want to help other people whenever you're able to do so, because what you'll find is the more you help other people, the more they want to help you. And you'll start to find that whenever you put out a message where it seems like you could do with other people's assistance, people you've helped in the past will start sharing that and will start forwarding things on because they want to repay that favor. Networking tip 5 would be to raise awareness of other people's work. So if one of the failings of social networking is to promote your own work too much, promoting other people's work can be really well received, because if other people have put a lot of effort into producing a report or doing something and they want to get the message out as wide as they can, but they don't want to be guilty of over-promoting it themselves, if other people chip in and help them to spread the message about the things that are important to them, that can be very powerful to them. So help other people to raise their profile, help them build their social networking followings, because they will then want to reciprocate. So for example, when I'm sharing content on, say, Twitter, I will go out of my way to try and put in those updates who the author of that piece was, or who it was in my network who first made me aware of that particular article or that particular report, so that I'm getting some visibility and some benefit from sharing the piece, but I'm also making sure that the person who brought it to my attention, or who was the author, is getting as much of the limelight as I am. And the more you do that, again, the more other people will do that for you in turn. Try to become a connector in your industry. So proactively make introductions to help other people in your network to maybe win work, to find potential business partners, to secure their next role. If you're responsible for being the initiator of any of these kinds of things happening in your network, you start to have, although it's all done digitally, although you're not doing this face-to-face with people, you can start to have a major impact on those people's professional lives, and they will in turn start to reciprocate that for you. And I keep using the word reciprocate. You shouldn't be doing any of these things expecting that you get something back in return. But actually what does happen is the more that you give and the more that you help other people, the more you start seeing that other people give and start helping you. So what goes around tends to come around, I would say. If you see people facing a particular challenge, a particularly difficult time in their careers, if you can go the extra mile at that point, that will be hugely well received. If someone is facing a grave situation and you jump to their side to help them, that is going to be remembered. And your actions may or may not ultimately help them. Hopefully they will, but they're not always going to help them. But just the fact that you cared and that you came to their assistance, in their hour of need, is going to be remembered by them. If someone's facing a challenge that's derailing their career, maybe they found themselves out of work, or they're way off, hitting their target this quarter, or they've come to the end of a contract and they're finding it really hard to track down a new contract. If you can be the person who steps in there and is one of the people in their network who helps them get out of that situation, that is hugely powerful. And we talked about this earlier already, but social networking requires an investment of time, and it requires consistency. So being present on social networking sites, when you're between contracts, and then being nowhere to be seen for several months while you're on your next contract, actually means that at the point where you need to call on your social network, i.e. when you're looking for your next contract, you don't have that following of people who are engaged with you, who want to help you, because for the last several months they've heard precious little from you. So success does require a consistent commitment of time and a long-term outlook in terms of the results you're going to get from this. Try to be ever present in the channels so that you can jump in and support people when it's needed, and so that you can react when people respond to the things you're doing. So if you use the types of tools I was talking about to schedule sharing good content over the course of the next week while you're out at client meetings or whatever it may be, try to check in on those accounts each day, so that if people have responded or people need your help in relation to something you shared, that you're actually there in person to help them as well, not that you're just some sort of automated flow of good information. And absolutely be consistent so that people are always looking out for your next communications, and therefore are always looking out for ways that they might be able to help you when you find yourself in a position that you do need help. And don't be afraid to schedule and automate. You know, the people who are achieving the greatest results are using the types of tools I talked to you about earlier to have a presence on these sites consistently over the course of a working week, potentially also over the weekend. I mean, it depends which sector you're in, it depends what messages you're putting out, but there's a lot of activity on these sites over weekends. So just because you're not working doesn't mean that you can't be sharing information with people who are using those sites over those periods of time. But just keep in mind that automation needs to be accompanied by having a regular real-life presence there as well. So that brings us pretty much to the end of the session. We have today looked at obviously the ways that the hiring market has moved on, how fundamentally we've moved from a situation where companies used to advertise all of their positions or go to recruitment firms and headhunters to proactively approach candidates, to a situation where now they're far more able to proactively approach candidates themselves, and therefore the roles of recruitment firms and of job boards and so on have altered accordingly. We've seen that it's really important that there's now this portion of jobs, the hidden jobs market, that's being filled without roles ever being advertised, be that contract, be that permanent roles. And that if you're not out there making sure your profiles are easily found through the right investment in keywords and in perfecting your profiles, and if you're not doing the right networking to expand the number of people you have in your networks, then there's simply a growing portion of the contract and the permanent job opportunities that you are never going to be aware of and never going to be considered for. And then we've moved on to see that there's obviously the different types of networks you could choose to invest your time in. I've tried to give you some steer on which of those is going to be most useful for different types of desired outcomes. And then in the second part of the presentation, we've focused on different types of activities that you could undertake to be more effective on those social networking platforms. So I hope that's been really useful for you today. I hope you've taken a lot from it. I've obviously given you some things that you could go away and focus on doing after this call in the coming days. I'll make sure all of you get a copy of this presentation after the session's concluded. But if anyone has any questions they'd like to put to me, I'm happy to stay online for a few minutes and try and tackle those as well. But for those of you that need to get off, thanks very much for your time, and I'll just wait to see if any questions come through on the chat facility now. Thank you.